All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this second day of HAC's second virtual forum and AGM. I'm just going to make a few introductory remarks, and then I'll continue by introducing our first session with Stephen Williams, who will be talking about the new pay equity laws. But a few opening remarks, so with your indulgence, before we get going. After making the difficult decision to go virtual for our second convention, we felt it was the prudent thing to do under the circumstances with the uncertain state of the pandemic and the recovery. We've put together some of our most popular sessions for today. We had yesterday tech briefings from Bell Helicopter and Airbus helicopters and Safran helicopter engines yesterday. And we had a session with Nick Robinson, the Director General, Transport Canada Civil Aviation. And again, today we'll proceed with Stephen Williams from Emond Harnden. We'll provide a briefing on the new pay equity laws. Balance of the day, we'll spend some time on our active committees, flight training and personnel licensing, chaired by Kathy Press. The committee will have Serge Cote from Transport Canada join as a special guest speaker. Safety and Quality Committee by Corey Taylor will welcome Bill Yearwood. Our last committee meeting will be Air Taxi and Aerial Work, chaired by Todd Cash. And we'll end out the day with our 26th annual general meeting. I wanted also to apologize to some of our other committees. The virtual platform has meant that we have to do more with less in terms of timing because of the time change from one end of the country to the other. So, hopefully next year we'll be in a position where we're back to a face-to-face conference again and a full slate of committee meetings. But until then, please accept our apologies for cutting out the other committees. Wednesday, we'll start out with Paul Dittman sharing the TSB 21 watch list, as well as recent and accident investigation session, sort of a staple in our convention program, accident year in review. TSB is also taking the opportunity to host an interactive town hall session. Session will include real-time questions and surveys to help the TSB direct the focus of upcoming watch list content. Tomorrow we'll also welcome our new president and CEO to HAC with our new directions session, where you'll be able to get to know a little bit Trevor Mitchell, our new president and CEO. We recognize their virtual meeting has its own set of challenges and limitations. We'd all rather be having this meeting in person, sharing a few stories and a few drinks. One thing that we know for sure, however, is our sponsors and partners have really stepped up to help us deliver a quality program and this virtual platform. Please take time to visit with our partners in the exhibit hall by selecting the exhibit hall from the left side menu. They have put some time and effort into building their virtual profiles and hope to engage with you while you're here. I'll take a few minutes now to thank our steadfast corporate sponsors and our virtual partners for jumping on board, our session speakers for stretching their virtual presentation skills, and of course our small but important conference team here at HAC. Thank you again to our corporate sponsors, and I'll say them by name here: Airbus Helicopters Canada, Airworks New Zealand, Bell Textron Canada, BMG, Gallagher, Leonardo Helicopters, Safran Helicopter Engines Canada, Standard Aero, Willis Towers, Watson. I'd like also to thank our 2021 virtual partners. Platinum partners: Airbus Helicopters, Bell Textron Canada, NAV Canada, RMC Inc., Gold partner, Emond Harnden, and our supporting partners, Helitrades, Onboard Systems International, Parker Lord, Reed Services, and their few will also go very briefly through a few housekeeping notes that'll hopefully make your time spent with us more fruitful and productive. I'd like to remind everyone that you're encouraged to take some time to complete your own profile with your contact details and even a photo if you'd like to facilitate networking during the conference. Although we may all feel a little over-zoomed, if you will, in the last 20 months, please attend the sessions and participate by using the Q&A function located in the lower right-hand part of your Zoom screen. While our sessions are underway. Most of our sessions today and tomorrow will seek your participation, and the chair or moderator, along with our tech producers, will help facilitate questions and comments to the best of our abilities. They will share some guidelines with you as the sessions start on the best way to ask questions and make comments during the presentation. On this platform, you can also make comments in the platform chat located on the right side of the window. Please take note, as well as any announcements or notices that appear on the platform in the lobby. These will be reminders of information to help you get the most out of the virtual sessions today. And I think that wraps up my welcome for today. And now we'll turn our attention to the first session of the day, being presented by Steve Williams of Emond Harnden. And he'll be providing a briefing on the new pay equity laws, as I've said earlier. Steve is a former longstanding board member at HAC and an engaged member of the helicopter community. I wanted to start by welcoming Steve and thanking him for his presentation. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fred. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks to you and the staff for pivoting again to a virtual platform. I think all agree that it would be much preferred if we could be together. Those are special events, but you know, we make the best of it. That's what we do in this industry. And I also do, speaking of this industry, just want to pause for a second, and I'm sure everybody on this call is excruciatingly aware of just how difficult things are in BC. And as far as this group is concerned, I think that, you know, a pat on the back is deserved. You know, without the heroic efforts of this industry, the floods and the recovery and the rescue operations would be even more challenging than they are. So my hat is tipped to operators who are assisting out there. Now on to other topics. Now, bear with me, I'm just going to share my screen so you can follow along with the slides. No, that's the right one. Okay, that looks promising. So referring to this as a new federal pay equity law is a bit of a misnomer. It was actually passed a couple of years ago, but it was put on ice as the government of the day felt that the pandemic was not the right time to be dropping further HR obligations on employers in the federal jurisdiction. But politics being politics, and the election that occurred in the fall, the government in the spring realized that they needed to move forward with this, and it came into force in August. And so now we have basically a 3-year window as employers in the federal jurisdiction to comply with this piece of legislation. And while 3 years may seem like a long time, it will literally fly by. This is a fair amount of what I call compensation engineering. It's a deep dive into your organization on the HR front, and a careful review, a detailed review of your compensation practices across the spectrum of your organizations. So the purpose of this briefing is to give you a taste of what compliance steps you're going to have to take in the immediate term. And we as a law firm are putting on a variety of webinars, hopefully some in live, as the 3-year clock winds along, to ensure that our clients are able to take the compliance steps they have to take. And you'll see that this is quite an onerous task that is before you. Unlike many of my prior briefings where we're talking about, you know, discrete changes to the Canada Labor Code or more recently, matters relating to COVID and those initiatives. This is very legislation which is very prescriptive. It tells you what you've got to do and when you've got to do it. So let's spend a few minutes, the next 45 minutes, going through that. If I could get my slide to move. All right, bear with me. Okay, seems to be working now. So you don't need to look at that. So what is pay equity? So pay equity is not equal pay for equal work. Equal pay for equal work is basically paying the same amount of money to a woman as a man to do the same job. So if you have an AME, you have a male AME and a female AME, equal pay for equal work is paying them the same rate of pay. So that's necessary. It's a necessary component of pay equity compliance, but it's not sufficient. Pay equity is providing the female job class employees with pay that is equal to the male job class employees when the value of their work is the same. And that's a really important phrase. I just want to see if I can, bear with me, I've got a bit of a technical issue. I want to change. There we go. Okay. So as you can see on the slide, the initiative here, or the effort here, and the heavy lifting here is the value exercise that you have to undertake with respect to each one of your job classes. So just as a very brief and overly simplistic example, if you have a female dominated class of employees, say for example, dispatchers, and you have a male dominated class of employees, say for example, AMEs, what you do to achieve pay equity is you undertake a valuation exercise for each of those jobs. And let's just, for sake of argument, without any, this has no bearing in fact, but just for illustrative purposes, let's assume that the AME job comes out at 100 points when valued, and the dispatcher job, the female dominated class, comes out at 50 points when valued. Pay equity would require you to ensure that you are paying your female job class dispatchers at least half of what you're paying your male dominated AMEs. So it does not mean that you must pay your dispatchers the same amount of money as your AMEs. It means that when you value the jobs, the values must line up and the pay must be equivalent. So behind that relatively simple statement is a hell of a lot of effort. And I'll get into that in a bit here later in the slides. And the other thing that the new Federal Pay Equity Act is, which the old pay equity obligations was not, is proactive. The Federal Pay Equity Act requires you to actually go out and construct and undertake this analysis and construct a pay equity plan. The old system was complaint driven. So for example, and it was pursuant to the Canadian Human Rights Act, if a female employee, going back to that dispatcher group, felt that she was not receiving equal pay or pay equity as compared to, say, the AME group, after evaluation, she would have to file a complaint with the Canadian Human Rights Commission. It was a very time-consuming and expensive, and in most instances, ultimately unsuccessful system. So most jurisdictions started with that, and most jurisdictions across the country and other provinces have enacted what we call this proactive pay equity model. Now, this legislation presumes that you will create one pay equity plan for your entire organization. Many organizations are going to want to consider going with multiple plans for reasons I'll get into in a second, but the default setting is one pay equity plan. And there are ongoing maintenance obligations, meaning that you have to review your plan every few years to make sure that it continues to ensure pay equity. It's a mathematical analysis. So the first deadline under the Pay Equity Act has actually already passed, and that's November 1, 2021. So it's not too far in the rearview mirror. And the obligation on the employer is to post a notice in the workplace, and you have to do a few things or include a few things on that notice. So first of all, there are, under the Pay Equity website, the Pay Equity Commissioner's website, there are a ton of tools and guidance material that will help you take steps to comply. This is complex stuff, but they've really tried to make it a little bit more manageable for employers to navigate. So you have to post this notice by November 2021. There are template notices on the website, and I would encourage you to go there and have a look at that. We have a number of clients that, literally filled in the blanks and posted the notice electronically and in a place basically where employees are going to see it. That's the objective. Now, if applicable, you have to establish a pay equity committee, and we'll get to what the criterion are for applicability in a second. And we'll talk about the committee membership. If you have non-unionized employees, which most of you do, the unionization rate among your industry is pretty low. Those employees have to be given an opportunity to designate their representative to the committee. And you do have to obviously inform unionized employees that the bargaining agent will select the representative committee members if in fact you are unionized, for the handful of you that are. Now, if any of you have missed this deadline to post this notice, I would encourage you to do it as soon as possible. It's not that you're going to get massive fines for not doing it, but I wouldn't let it slide too far into Q1 of 2022. That said, I wouldn't post the notice until you have a better idea and understanding of what your compliance obligations are, because once you post the notice, you're going to get a bunch of questions from people asking what the implications are. So you'll want to take some time to inform yourself. So the posting requirements are pretty straightforward. It's got to be, as I say, electronic or readily available to all employees. If you're going to, and I would encourage you to post printed documents as well. It's got to be in a conspicuous place where your employees are going to see it. If you've got an intranet, that would be a useful place to post it. And it's got to be accessible to any disabled employees, and you include the date upon which it's posted. Now, just to give you an idea, here's the, this is actually the template that the government has made available to us. And as I say, it's available on the website. So now this is where the rubber hits the road. You're required, and I'll get into the circumstances in a second, but there's an obligation to create a pay equity committee or committees. And, I know we all love, another workplace committee that we have to contend with, but this is a necessary evil. And here's some of the criteria. So you have to create the committee for certain employers. So if you look at the chart there, if you have 100+ employees in your organization, you have to create a committee. You have no choice in the matter. If you're between 10 and 99 employees and you have some unionized employees, you again have to create a pay equity committee. But if you, and I know this to be the case for many of you, if you're between 10 and 99 employees and none of them are unionized, then the decision to create a pay equity committee is up to you. Now, that doesn't mean that you can choose not to comply with the pay equity obligations. You still have to create the plan. It's just that you don't have to create the committee. And I'm going to suggest to you that that would be welcome. If you can avoid creating a committee, you probably should. And the reason for that, well, there are many reasons, but one reason, and we'll get into this in a second as well, is that the committee will have very broad access to your compensation practices, your contract terms, the entitlements, up and down the line. So all the way up into your executive suite, those terms and conditions of employment are going to be made known to your pay equity committee, because the pay equity plan is company-wide, it's organization-wide, it's not limited just to employees, it includes managers and executives. So I would suggest that you not establish a committee if you can avoid it. That's a practical consideration, but I will obviously leave that up to you. So if you are required, or if you choose to create a committee, what is it? What is the committee made up of? Well, first of all, it has to have at least 3 members. And actually, one point I want to make right out of the gate: while the committee may have multiple members, the voting system, and it is a voting system on decisions that the committee makes, is based on the following: the employer gets 1 vote, and the employees collectively get 1 vote. So nobody has majority control or authority of the committee, but equally, the employees cannot direct the outcome of the decisions. So if a dispute arises, in other words, the employer who's casting their 1 vote, and all of the employees, if they're different groups, unionized and non-union people who have representatives on the committee, if those people can't agree, or if they do agree, but you don't agree as between the employer member and the employees, then you have to actually go to the Pay Equity Commission to have the issue determined. So you can see that there's a lot of bureaucratic activity associated with this, and possibly conflict, and a lot of time and effort is going to go into this compliance effort. Yet another reason why, if you're able to avoid having a committee, that would be my recommendation. But if you must have a committee, this is the composition. So you have to have at least 3 members. So if you've got to have 3 people, but 2/3 of them have to represent employees to whom the plan relates. Now, remember what I said about the voting, though. It doesn't mean that the employees, if they have a greater number of individuals, have more votes. That's not the case. The votes are 50-50 employer-employee. At least 50% of the members have to be women, which frankly isn't surprising given the thrust of the legislation. And then the employer has to select at least 1 member. I would recommend that you send 2 people from the employer side so that they can confer and support each other in the decisions that have to be made. And again, if they're unionized people, then 1 unionized rep from each bargaining agent. And if they're non-union, then the employees select at least 1 member by the majority of the non-unionized employees to represent them. So again, there's a bit of a mechanical exercise that you have to go through here. Now, the commission website has a ton of material that will help you with this. If you don't like what you're reading there, and I can assure you many of you won't, because I've already been on the receiving end of a number of calls. While the commission website is helpful, this legislation is challenging, and it is going to create discussions and debates within your workplace that, quite frankly, many employers would prefer not to have. And it may even reveal some rifts within your organization. So this is obviously a compliance exercise, but you're going to want to give a lot of thought to the communication strategy here. This is legislation that has been imposed. I will say, hand on my heart, that I believe strongly in the public policy objective here, trying to ensure, pay equity between male and female employee groups. I do, but this is a cumbersome, difficult, challenging piece of legislation. And it is going to present difficulties for organizations large and small. I can't sugarcoat that. But if at the end of the day, you come out with a workforce that is fairly compensated as between the genders, then that is a good outcome. That's a positive outcome. So I would encourage you, as you're looking at your communication strategy, to reflect on the general wisdom of the end game and the objective, but also on the need for people to cooperate and collaborate as we work through this, because it's going to be difficult at times. So you'll see at the second to last bullet, there's reference to potentially creating subcommittees. And the reason for that is that this is a large undertaking. And one of the most significant undertakings is going to be a job evaluation exercise. Now, some of your organizations will already have robust job descriptions for each of your roles. Some of you may even have undertaken a job evaluation exercise where you have already valued the jobs that you have based on, the skills required, the environment in which they work, the factors that, the various factors that are included in the job evaluation tool. And it is a significant undertaking to evaluate all of the jobs, and that's one of the things that the committee is to oversee. Now, one sort of practice point I would suggest is if you can delay the creation or activation of the pay equity committee, if you have to create one, I would encourage you as the employer, while you still have a measure of control over this, to have a conversation with a job evaluation consultant and try and get some visibility on where your exposure may be right now. Most job eval consultants can look at your organization. We're talking, tens of people and not hundreds or thousands of people. Most job eval consultants can look at your organization, look at your job descriptions, your compensation structure, the gender breakdown of your organization, and basically give you a sense of whether you've got a problem or not, or whether you've got a large undertaking in front of you in terms of compliance or not. So last week I was speaking to the flight training unit at ATAC, which is, a subgroup of the ATAC industry association. And I encouraged them to seek out a job evaluation consultant as a group that they might retain, because, in the flight training world, as in your world, these are unique jobs to your companies, but you all have basically the same jobs within your organizations, right? So why train and pay the price of training, half a dozen different consultants across the country if you can identify maybe one or two who become expert in understanding helicopter operations? So one thing that HAC may want to consider is facilitating the identification of a job evaluation consultant that, you'll each pay your own way with the consultant, but you might drive a better price. And you might also, and I think that the far greater value, frankly, is getting a consultant who in fairly short order will actually learn, the structure of a helicopter operation, which is unique. So that's something that we could perhaps discuss offline if there is an interest. The other thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to provide this committee with resources and training, and all of this does cost, and it is at your cost. There's no government support for any of this. When the individuals are working, doing their committee work, it's on work time. So you're going to have to backfill if you're taking people off the floor or out of the cockpit, which I know is a very touchy subject given labor shortages caused by just the labor market and other pressures, flight and duty time regs, things like that. So this is going to have out-of-pocket expenses as well as you support the committees. So I've already touched on that. You have to make space and equipment available for these individuals to carry out their committee work. The second bullet is probably among the most troubling, and I've already touched on it, but the committee is entitled to information that's quote unquote necessary for the establishment of a pay equity plan. And what that means is that they will get detailed compensation information for every member, every employee within your organization. Now, yes, committee members are subject to strict confidentiality obligations, but as someone who spent a good time in his career trying to enforce things like that, once the leak occurs, the damage is done. The enforcement is kind of closing the barn door after the horse is bolted. So it can be a challenge, but we have to, at a certain level, trust our people. They all have, most of them have, or many of them, I should say, will be entrusted with confidential information of your organizations already. But the piece I hear and the piece I understand is about executive compensation, and having employees understand either how much or how little, frankly, to be candid about it, some of the executives make in this industry is going to put some pressures on your organization. And you don't want that to leak, but I think you have to assume it's going to leak. So the only way to potentially avoid that issue where you have the committee with broad access to the compensation information of executives is to have two plans. And I'm going to talk about one plan versus two plans in a second. But as I said at the beginning, the default is for a single plan. The expectation by the Pay Equity Commission is a single plan. And if you want two plans, you're going to have to go and get permission to do that. And the value of two plans is simply this. If you have a separate plan for your executive group, for example, then you establish a committee for that plan. Well, your employee group does not get compensation information for the members of the other executive plan. So it's a way to put a dividing line in terms of sharing of confidential information between the employees and the executive or management group. So I have a number of clients who are actively exploring, even smaller ones, actively exploring making an application to have multiple plans, generally two, instead of just one. But I can tell you it's going to be an uphill battle with the Pay Equity Commission. But that's a note for you to make as you consider your compliance obligations. Okay. If there are, as I've already touched on this, so if there are challenges or debates among the within the committee or the question of multiple plans or single plans, the Pay Equity Commission essentially provides a dispute settlement mechanism. And the intention is for they try and work it out on a mediated basis first. But if they can't do that, then usually it'll be on written submissions. You'll have to make your case to the Pay Equity Commission. I'm not going to lie, this is going to be a boon to guys like me because there is going to be a lot of friction and a lot of conflict. And in many instances, you're going to want your lawyer involved because the decisions are going to be critically important. The most important of which is probably single plan versus multiple plans. So what are your obligations as the Pay Equity Committee in terms of its timeline? So you've got to start off by identifying the job classes, and that's kind of groups of jobs. So, you may have a clerical group, which may be sort of reception. Maybe you've got some clerical people in your accounts receivable, accounts payable. You may have sales and marketing people. Some of those may fall into natural job classes. And then on the flight ops side, you would have your pilots typically in their own job class, your maintenance people in their own job class. There will be some other, hangar, employees who support activities and work in the hangar who may fall into the AME job class. But, this is one of the decisions that you're going to have to make. And again, the commission's website, I mean, each one of these topics is a day-long seminar in and of itself, such as the level of complexity here. So you do want to spend some time with the Pay Equity Commission's website first to inform yourself. And then as you start to make some decisions around one plan or two plans, committee makeup, do we go with a committee, yes or no? Then you may need some assistance with this. And I put that in quotes because every client that I know that is engaged or dealing with, every client of this firm has opened a pay equity file because of the complexity of it. So I just point that out for you. Once you have your job classes, you make a decision about whether they're predominantly male, predominantly female. Then, and this all looks very easy. The first two are relatively easy. Item 3 is where the heavy lifting occurs when you have to determine the value of work in the job classes. And that's the job evaluation exercise. And that's where you're going to need external assistance. Very few organizations will have in-house capability to carry out the job evaluation piece. Then with respect to each job, you've got to calculate the compensation associated with each job. And that's all elements of compensation. That's wages, that's benefits, that's, dare I say it, per diems. It's all elements of compensation that an individual receives for carrying out their duties and responsibilities. Then once you've identified the compensation associated with a job class, you sit down and you compare them between the predominantly male and predominantly female job classes. So you value the job, you now know what you're paying them, and you chart them and you compare them and say, okay, maybe let's go back to my initial example. Dispatchers, female dominated. The valuation comes in at 50% of the AMEs, male dominated. But you look at the compensation and you see the dispatchers, and I'm using this as an extreme example, are paid 25% of what an AME is paid. But in order to achieve pay equity, the dispatchers need to be paid 50% of what an AME is being paid. So that means that those dispatchers need to see increases in pay over time. And it's not immediate, but this is where the plan comes in. The pay equity plan is you need to start adjusting those wages up. And you obviously wages, theoretically could be adjusted up or down, but the legislation won't allow you to adjust it down. Okay, I'm going to handle questions at the end. There's one question that's come in. I'm going to handle them at the end. And I'm mindful that I'm going a little bit more slowly than I had anticipated, but this is a rather dense topic. So I'll try and pick up the pace. The slide deck will be made available to you through Fred or through our office, whichever you prefer. So just quickly going through the committee's obligation. So the committee's doing these things, right? So you can see how it's not the employer calculating the compensation associated with each job class. It's the committee that's made up of employer and employee representatives. And if you can't agree on, for example, what the compensation is for an AME, because there's a dispute about whether something should be included or not, you're off to the Pay Equity Commission for a decision. So you compare them and then you draft your plan. Item 6, you post and draft your pay equity plan and provide a comment period. And then you post a final version of the pay equity plan. And then you, in item 8, you start to make adjustments to compensation increase. And then you update this plan at least every 5 years. So there's a lot of visibility, and there's a lot of visibility that people are going to have on each other's compensation that they don't currently enjoy. So I say issue number 1 is single versus multiple plans. So the as I said, the default setting is the Act presumes one plan. Now, each plan gets a committee. And so this is the strategic decision to be made, because one thing, like, if you start with one plan and conclude that it's not going to work, you can then apply to have multiple plans. And in fact, the commission in their materials says that's what they want to see. They want to see employers try and do it with one plan. But I can tell you that most of my clients are looking for a multi-plan approach with a dividing line somewhere up the management ranks. And, we'll see whether the commission bites on that. It's an open question right now. One thing I will say, as critical as I will be throughout, this process and this whole compliance process of the Pay Equity Commission, I will say that the Pay Equity Commissioner is a lawyer by the name of Karen Jensen, and a lawyer that I have a lot of respect for. So she's the ultimate decision maker for all of this. She's an ex-management side labor and employment lawyer, so she really understands the challenges that employers face in this area. It's not to say she's not going to vigorously enforce and apply the law. I expect she will, but I also expect that we'll get a fair shake. And unlike at some employment tribunals, it's unlikely to be, let's call it politically charged or biased. It will get a fair shake, notwithstanding what I would suggest are some of the challenges with the legislation itself. So the general preference, as I say, is a single plan. There are some, we have to apply to the commissioner for authorization to establish more than one plan. That's an authorization request. I would suggest, if you're thinking about doing that, you wait until into Q1 until we can start seeing some of the decisions from the commissioner to see if they are trending towards allowing these or not. You don't want to be at the sharp end on these kinds of cases because it'll be expensive and time consuming. And I can assure you that there are employers already out there ahead of you in the queue with their application for the multiple plan. And we will keep you apprised of what decisions the commission renders. And that will give us some assistance, as clients ask, well, what's my likelihood of success? So what's the commissioner looking at to make a determination versus single versus multiple plans? They want to know whether there are enough predominantly male job classes within that group, right, for the female job class to compare to. So let's just take an example. Let's say you have a dividing line. You're applying for two plans. You've got a female-dominated sales and marketing management team, for example, and then you've got male-dominated finance, flight ops, and let me just, actually, that's sufficient. If you've got a female-dominated group, the sales and marketing group, and male-dominated groups, finance, flight ops, and I'm talking about the management side of it here, I think you're going to satisfy that enough predominantly male job classes, because you've got a target to which you can compare the female to the male. You've got two targets in that case. And the catch-all, whether it's appropriate in the circumstances to authorize establishments of more than one plant, is pretty broad, but I'll get into that in just 1 second. So when we're talking about whether you have enough female or male-dominated job classes, there's no hard and fast rule. There's no number. But I think if we can go forward with an application that says, look, we've got 2 or 3 male-dominated groups, so this female-dominated group has a number of groups to compare to. So we're going to get a meaningful analysis. And so that's basically it for that one. Now, the criterion of whether it's appropriate in the circumstance, this is the one where they want to see whether the employer tried to create a single plan. Another reason for waiting with your application, waiting for submitting an application in this regard into Q1 2022, is that we want to see how serious the commission is about that requirement. I think that the reality is we're going to have a lot of employers who are not going to try, or are not going to try very hard to create a single plan. And I'm hoping that the commission will recognize that within some employers, particularly smaller ones, that it's appropriate to have multiple plans with a dividing line across the management group. The other thing the commission will consider is, are there objections? So an employee group will be made aware of the fact that you're making this application, and they will be given an opportunity to file an objection. So you may have a female-dominated group in the other plan, the second plan, who says, but I want to be able to compare myself to that finance management group. I think that's where I want to be comparing myself. Now, remember, it doesn't mean just because somebody wants to compare themselves to that they get paid that. It's the jobs are valued, and then the pay is aligned to the relative value of the two jobs. But nonetheless, that female-dominated group, that dispatcher group, may want to compare themselves to the male finance group. So they may make a pitch and say, look, it's appropriate for me to compare with that group. I think that would be a bit of a stretch. There aren't any sort of career progression connections there, but maybe the dispatchers want to be able to compare themselves to the management group and the flight ops side. Maybe they make that pitch. And again, we don't know what the commission is going to do with that. This is all completely new territory. The next one is, would establishing multiple plans meet the purpose of the act? So what you're going to need to be able to show is that by doing, generating two plans, you're not creating gender discrimination because they don't have access to the female-dominated group doesn't have access to the appropriate male comparator. The other issue is that maybe regional disparities, and this will apply to sort of a national operator. And there may be reasons for having multiple plans based on different geographic locations. And that's worth exploring if you're a large operator with multiple locations. We'll see how that plays out as well. For those of you that have unionized employees, there's not a bad argument to be made that there should be one plan for the unionized employees and one for everybody else. But depending upon how the union is structured, like does it include, let's say it's a pilots union and there isn't a discernible female dominated group, maybe, maybe just pick first officers for a second. Maybe there's not a discernible female dominated group of first officers within that group. That bargaining unit and the Pay Equity Commission is going to expect that the plan would apply to a broader group of employees than just the bargaining unit. But for any of you that are unionized, you want to look carefully at whether or not we can divide the plan down bargaining unit lines. I mentioned this already. The Act is very strong in its wording in terms of pay equity compliance, confidentiality compliance. So members who get this information are not to disclose it, but I can tell you everybody on this webinar right now is shaking their head because these obligations, it will leak and it will become the subject of rumor and conjecture and speculation. So this information is going to get out, no doubt about it. Now, bargaining agents that receive this information, one of the things that has us most concerned is unions getting their hands on this and then having it impact their position at the bargaining table. The union can't say across the table, well, I happen to know that your executive makes $750,000 a year, because they can't do that. But if they don't like the wage increase that they're getting, they may just dig in their heels and make statements like, look, we know you can afford it. We know you pay others better and give bigger increases to other employees. So it is going to be a problem at the bargaining table. And unfortunately, there's not much that we can do about it. So as I mentioned, as some practical considerations, executives are included in pay equity plans. There's no escaping that. One possibility is finding a mechanism to have a separate plan for executives. The commissioner guidance, is that if you've got a unionized member on the pay equity committee, they shouldn't be on the negotiating team. That's partly the effort to keep the confidential information away from the bargaining table. It's a little artificial, but it's better than nothing. As far as it playing into collective bargaining, I can tell you that each of my employer clients that are unionized, if they have to establish a pay equity plan, have themselves gone out and gotten pay equity compensation expertise consulting advice on their own to get some downstream view of what the likely pay equity impact is going to be on their wage structure for their predominantly female groups. So they want to get some visibility on those costs that they're going to face. And that's a really smart thing to do. And you don't need to share all that if you, the employer, just go out and retain your own consultant. Now, the committee is going to be doing its own work, of course, but what I'd say to my clients is get as much understanding as you can of what the likely outcome is going to be, and then factor that into your collective bargaining strategy when you go to the table to make sure that you've preserved enough money to make your pay equity payments, but also get a deal at the bargaining table in terms of wage increases or adjustments. I can't stress this enough, communications. Obviously, the notice should have been posted already. If it hasn't been done, we need to get it out there. I would do everything you can to keep the communications as positive as possible, officially and unofficially. This is heavy lifting. It's a lot of work. It's social engineering. It is all of those things, but it's the law. And we really want to try and avoid situations where we find ourselves in conflict with the Pay Equity Commission. That will be unproductive, expensive activity. And I say unproductive because at the end of the day, they are going to order you to take measures to ensure pay equity compliance. And they do have some significant powers. We'll see how much they want to flex those powers as this rolls out. So excellent resource, probably the best resource to get yourself up to speed is the Pay Equity Commissioner's website. They're constantly updating it. The IPGs are really good. The templates are helpful. The information, I would not deviate. If you can use their template, I would, because it's always easier to defend what's on that template than going and creating your own document and having to explain that. Now, we are going to be doing regular seminars and resource, as well. So if you check out our website or receive our newsletter, you'll be advised of those as they are unfolding and rolled out. It's a 3-year timeline for compliance. So, key thing to do right now is get that notice up, give some thought to single versus multiple plans. Those are really your key considerations. One thing I will say is pay equity consultants right now are very hard to come by. They're exceedingly busy. So I come back to my suggestion that you give some thought to, and I would help you review and source these individuals. There are good ones, and like everything in this world, there's some that perhaps should pursue other careers. But getting the right pay equity consultant will be critical. So now we have some time for questions. I think I have about 5 minutes. Yeah, I have about 5 minutes. So I'm just going to slide this over here. Okay, so the question is, do basic supply demand considerations play a role in determining strategies? And the question goes on, and the answer is yes. It is a consideration, but I'll be candid with you, it's no longer the consideration, the only consideration. So for example, when you're valuing an AME, and an AME is an excellent example, they can be, challenging to locate and retain. When you're in the market for an AME, you're going to have to adjust your compensation to the market. And one of the things we know is that the pandemic probably masked, and in some cases actually didn't mask at all, but masked to a certain extent the very real shortage for qualified pilots and qualified AMEs. And so what that means is that these jobs are such that you need to offer more to attract people. It's a competitive labor market. But the short answer to your question is the labor market considerations are a factor in valuing the job. So your receptionist, which is easier to hire, will be lower valued than your AME, who is very hard to hire in the marketplace. Like, that's a simplistic approach, but that's what the evaluation will disclose. The challenge is going to be when the valuations occur, what is the difference, right? Is the receptionist valued at 25 points and the AME valued at 100 points? Is the receptionist getting 25% of the AME's pay? If the answer is yes, then you have pay equity. If the answer is no, the receptionist is getting 18%, 20%, then you have a pay equity gap, which you then have to close. So next question is a good one, actually, particularly for our industry here, is how does pay equity apply to seasonal contract employees? Now, I'm going to be very careful with my termination here, and the questioner has been careful with his termination here because he's talking about employees. Pay equity applies to employees, not what we in the industry sometimes refer to as contractors when we mean independent contractors, true independent contractors. Those are businesses, those are not employees. So the pay equity applies to employees. So you will be evaluating your employees, and I say valuing your employee jobs, and then ensuring that the pay equity is in place. Now, the next question is, what happens if you have no females in your organization? And that's a good question, and it's one that is, I attend a lot of HAC and aviation industry events, and you look around the room and it is definitely predominantly male, and that is changing, and it's changing for the better. But if you don't have any female employees, you still have to go through the exercise, because the way it works is it's either female dominated in terms of its the actual numbers or historically. So for example, if you've got, and reception is probably the best example, receptionist roles are historically and typically female. You would tag that as your female dominated job class, right? And so individuals who are in that role would have their jobs evaluated. And if you needed to adjust the pay for those individuals, so it means that males working in those roles will have their salaries increased. Okay, so it's a good question. Excuse me. And I see that I have worn you out entirely and completely. I'll share with you a quick anecdote. We gave a similar presentation at another aviation industry group, and I won't name them, just before the pandemic hit, and in 2019, actually. And the law had been enacted and passed. It hadn't come into force. And the, I'm going to call it the open hostility in the room was palpable. There was a lot of frustration with what the government has done here at a time when your industry is, frankly, exceedingly busy in many quarters, in a recovery mode. And you have had another layer of legislative and legal obligations imposed upon you and inserted into your business that I can tell you will be costly and disruptive and have the potential to create some friction within your individual organizations. That said, when you come out at the other end of this, if you are an organization that is seeking to attract and broaden the pool of labor, and you are able to say we have achieved pay equity and provide the assurance to female members of the profession, whatever profession that you need to draw from, you will be a more attractive employer to a broader pool of talent. So I don't quarrel with, as I say, the policy objective. My challenge is with some of the implementation steps that you're going to have to take. So with that, I would just say my thanks to you for joining us this morning, for taking some time out of your day. And I hope I haven't spoiled your day. You've got a great day ahead of you with some committee meetings and the AGM. And I look forward to participating in those as well. And most importantly, I look forward to seeing each of you in person when we do this next year live, when we're through the worst of this pandemic. I want to thank everybody very much.